Okay. Welcome back, Jenny Mackenzie.
Thank you. Thank you.
You were saying backstage, it makes a difference to see it in front of a crowd.
It's so fun to see it with an audience and just have you adore Ivy and laugh at all of the moments and cheer for the brave Sabrina Causey and fall in love with Kareem. And, you know, as you can see, we found an amazing protagonist.
Yes, you did. We'll come back to him in a moment. So I just wanted to say that we, if you have questions, I've already asked some questions. I have more. I've had my chance, but if you have questions or comments, please raise your hand throughout. I'm going to get us sort of going. And I think we're going to try to get a microphone, but you guys know how to project, right? You can just sort of shout it out. Yeah. We'll work it out. I wanted to begin in some ways in the way that we did on the radio program. For those who did not have an opportunity to hear you explain your way into this issue, and it's kind of personal.
Yeah, reading is definitely personal for me. I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 14 years old and was one of those sort of closeted, stumbly, not very good readers. And my mom, I grew up in New York City, divorced parents, kind of a radical feminist mom who sent me to a real hippy dippy school. And at that hippy dippy school was, of course, sort of more, you're surrounded by books. You're going to naturally learn to read. There's no systematic, explicit instruction. And so that diagnosis was just, you know, a relief. Still, I don't think I sort of came out of the closet until truly this film, honestly.
Really?
I mean, I tell people, but it's not really what you put on your curriculum vitae, right? Yeah. So it's been a process because there's a lot of shame with being a poor reader, right? Especially when you're from a family like mine and that are a part of that 30% that many of them will naturally, I bet you were that way, Doug. I bet your brain was sort of wired that way, where 30% of the population, anything can happen and they will naturally learn to read. But for 60 or 70% of us, we really need explicit instruction to be told what the steps are and how you will learn to read. So it's been kind of a wonderful process for me of coming to a different sense of peace with who I was as a learner and a reader, and became a very strong reader thanks to that intervention.
Did you ever think that the film in its earlier stages might be something more personal? Did you ever think about?
I did. The amazing Jamie Redford, who has since passed on, consulted on several of my other documentaries. And he made a film about dyslexia and his son, Dylan. And there have been several films done on dyslexia. So I kind of wasn't sure what the angle would be. But when we first started on the film, we really thought it was going to be about kindergarten readiness and why kids weren't ready to start kindergarten with phonemic awareness, with some of those letter sounds and pre-literacy skills. And then quickly into our discovery, and a documentary is really like a giant dissertation or thesis. You're doing tons of research, peeling back those layers at all times. And I think we quickly learned that you see families like we have in the film who were doing everything they could to advocate for these amazing tools. And despite setting up their children for success, their kids would get to these whole language balanced literacy classrooms and be faced with lots of challenges that actually could even undo the wonderful work that the families had done at home. So it was clear that this had to be a film about early reading instruction.
What sort of a difference did it make? And when in the process did you find Kareem Weaver? And what difference did he make? described him as the protagonist, which is right. And I think, right. And so the question is, what difference did he make, and his passion for all of this in the way the film developed? What difference did he
Oh,
make?
I mean, finding Kareem was, just pivotal for us. And we met Kareem. Emily Hanford is an amazing investigative journalist. She has been following this story around early reading instruction for 5 years. This, I think, sold a story that's now number 5 on the Apple podcast list, is her 5th podcast. We interviewed her 4.5 years ago.
Wow.
And so very early and she piqued our interest. Sabby and I just loved her podcast and all that she was saying. And that really, I think, helped us to focus. And then we met Kareem through Margaret Goldberg, who is in her very first podcast and is a literacy coach. So she introduced us to Kareem. We're in the pandemic. You can't film. We Zoomed with him almost weekly, really got to know him. And then he digitized all of those beautiful home videos that you see. And so, he's really been a huge collaborator in this process. I mean, he's a producer with us as well, but this is his story. So finding Kareem was a game changer. And really, as I tell so many of my fantastic students who are here, it is story and character. And so we found it. And he was thinking about the petition and filing the petition. He had not, but he was starting to write it. He was starting to work with all of these community organizations, but he was doing that on Zoom. So how do you tell that story? How do you show it? How do you film it? All of these challenges that we face that, really are kind of tough for wanting to show things cinematically.
So I wondered about, as you were discussing what you wanted this film to become and what you were going to focus on. And it seems to me one of the things you could have focused on was, let's really dig into the reading wars. But that's not really what you do. It seems like you're moving it forward. I mean, clearly the idea of this big debate about how we learn and how we got to this point that's incredibly important to the idea of the film, but it seems like you're trying to move it beyond that or something. Will you talk about that?
Yeah, no, I thank you, because I hope you really don't want a documentary, just like a good narrative, to be stuck in the past. I hope that people have enough information, because I think we need to understand the reading wars. And we need to understand these two ideas of early reading instruction. But I think you hope that a narrative pushes you forward in time and is a call to action. I mean, ultimately, I think this is a story about activism and advocacy. And we hope there's giant policy change, which there is. Don't call me out on this, Utahns, because I know we did just pass our bill and you're not up on this animation, but yay for us that we have passed that bill, which is so important. But I think it's ultimately got to be a film about the future, right?
Yeah. I don't want to neglect people who may have questions. So go ahead and raise your hands if you do. Yes, please.
Oh, I wish I could remember them all. 4 actually passed by the time we had finished filming. One was having a leader in the Oakland Unified School District who is truly focused on early reading instruction, who was bringing in literacy coaches. Another one was professional development support. Another one was, the first one that they did pass that we focus on was really bringing out balanced literacy and whole language curricula and bringing in the science of reading. I can't remember. It was a big petition, right? That was, very legal. And so for us, one of the challenges with the story is how do you simplify that so we can understand it sort of enough for the film and Kareem's movement forward. But I can find out. Kareem, it's public. I think the petition is public, actually.
Yes.
I hire people who are smarter and younger than me. And that's sort of the number one golden rule. But
That's the secret sauce.
the secret sauce,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think in general, the most critical creative collaborator you have in a documentary is really your editor. Your editor is your assistant director, your co-director almost, so to speak. And we did a ton of editing through this process. And I think in many ways, the silver lining of the pandemic was that Sabby, my producer, and I were able to sit with the transcripts for so long and really look at those transcripts. Danny Schmidt, who was our DP and lead cinematographer, he was out of work. And so he did some editing and did scene selections for us. And we just kept going back to Kareem, the families, what we had had. We literally were using Zoom recordings from Kareem, knowing that we would shoot when we would get out there. But I think meeting Cameron Bear, who did these gorgeous animations that you see, he's a Spy Hop graduate. And, you know, so visually thinking about how you bring the story to the screen is such a challenge. And it's just, it's really crafting that edit and finding out what the story is and anything else that's not connected to that story, letting go of it, right? Really letting go of it.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Ivy is quite the chatterbox and vocabulary is so critical, right? And Teresa is working with the program that they participated in, which is really all about vocabulary, talking to children, conversational turns, because talking is what we need to have a rich vocabulary before we understand phonemic awareness, letter sounds, all those pieces, right? You have to have a rich vocabulary to become a good reader. So that's so critical.
Are you guys able to hear the questions from the audience? Okay, great. All right. I always worry about that. Yes, please.
Good question. Emily's latest podcast is 6 hours long, and she goes deep into the publishing companies. What we really did through our research process is a lot of uncovering, a lot of investigation, and reading everything that had sort of been published. We felt this was so connected to Kareem's activism and what he was doing with change that we really weren't interested in interviewing the publishing companies. But I think from my perspective, there needs to be culpability, right? It's a business where you are selling a curriculum, and if there isn't third-party research and data that is valid and that is reliable and that is rigorous, right? Looking at how they test this kind of curriculum on a diverse population of kids is really, really important. So I feel pretty excited that Kareem was so brave in all of his YouTube videos. I mean, he really is someone who is courageous and unapologetic in the way in which he calls out publishing companies and feels very much like shame on you.
Let me ask one, and then I'll get to you. Hold on one second, because as a follow-up, I think it's interesting. Say something about Kareem's approach. This was something he talked to us about. He mentioned that the kind of squabbling going on in the country, keeping people from coming to consensus, blaming, doesn't seem partisan for him necessarily. He called it a social justice movement, but he also talked about the importance of, what did he say? He said, we're all in this bus and it's going off a cliff and we're arguing about who's sitting where. Say something more about the approach, because you kind of lean into that in the film.
Yeah, I mean, we lean into it because this is really his work, right? And this is his belief. But he had a fantastic metaphor that he shared with Doug during his interview. And he said, you know, we're all on this bus going off the cliff. And whether you're sort of at 21%, whether you're at 45%, whether you're at 54%, you know, it's all pretty bad. And are you sitting in the front of the bus? Are you sitting in the middle of the bus? Are you sitting in the back of the bus? It's all heading off of that cliff, which is concerning. And I think his big thing is this is a nonpartisan issue. This is really not about red. It's not about blue. It's really a time where we all have to come together and fight for early literacy. And we've done that. I mean, we're seeing, I think, many pockets in our country where we have sort of a blue city, perhaps, in a red state that's actually playing very well together in the sandbox and creating some good literacy decisions and good legislation. I think we're a good example. The bill that we just passed in Utah was, you know, it's fantastic. Now we have a challenge because a bill is only as good as the implementation of the bill, right? So you have this bill, you have a lot that is written, and how do you take all that is written in a giant bill and really make sure it's actionable? That's I think, the big piece.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I like your thinking, right? I mean, complacency is biting us in the butt, right? And if we really aren't speaking up and advocating for our children and the next generation and what matters, you know, the very most to be able to participate in our democracy, which is being able to read, being able to, you know, fill out a job application, then what have we done? So yeah, I think passivity and complacency is not the way to go.
Kareem Weaver talked about how it all starts at home. Say a little bit more about sort of parent advocacy, the role that Kareem anyway wants parents to play in this process.
Kareem has, you know, so many Kareemisms, we call them, and they're just like so good. You know, you always just want to sort of have your voice memo going when he's speaking. But I think he feels as though we are way too busy and we just aren't present and engaged with our young children enough. And he said, we're watching the football game, we're answering our own texts, we're tweeting, we're doing other things, and we really aren't present and connected when they are young and they are little. And that's so important. And I think that's what we really show, is how engaged these families are with their young children and how very hard they are working to set them up for success. Yes. Big casting process, right? No, I'm kidding. It's not. It's not a casting process. We early on, when we were thinking that early educational technology was going to be this story in kindergarten readiness, we had tapped into 2 evidence-based early ed tech programs, and one is Lena, that Teresa, Isaiah, and Ivy had participated in. And they are a nonprofit out of Boulder, Colorado. And that's how we found them. And then we found Melinda and Fred Jr. and Melanie through the Waterford Upstart program, which is a local nonprofit that also has evidence-based reading instruction.
Am I missing questions up here?
Did you direct them? Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Yeah, there's one. Okay.
That she was adding science of reading.
You mean whether or not Lucy Calkins was sort of adapting the new cognitive science, or is it lip service? What do you think? Do you have an opinion about that? Yeah. That's a good question.
I think that the biggest challenge that we've seen from our research with the changes that units of study, some of the Fontes and Pinnell pieces, some of the reading recovery pieces, is they've incorporated some changes and acknowledged that this is science and data and that it's valid and that it's here to stay. But they create a new addendum to their curriculum that they then sell to the school districts. And so again, I think if we really look at a wake-up call and culpability, we say, oh my gosh, like, I know better now. I've learned, I'm looking at this evidence and I'm creating this new module and I am giving it out because I want what's best for all these children, right? I'm not going to charge an additional fee. So I think that's what we've seen.
You'll really like Emily Hanford's podcast. Oh, you did? Oh, you have? Okay. There
I
you
love
go. Does she get into that then? Yeah.
I think time will tell, right? I mean, we don't have enough time. Emily just interviewed her. I think it was 9 months ago, and she turned Emily down many times prior to that, not answering emails. So, really, we have to wait a couple of years to look at the data and really see. But if we want full transparency, a curricula like that needs a giant overhaul, not just a little addendum that is added to implement some more phonics work, right? It really needs a big overhaul, in my opinion. So, absolutely.
Thank you. Yes, back there.
I don't know enough about that research and looking at whether kids are reading on their screens or in a hard book. Is that what you're really talking about? I mean, I think technology is here to stay and it's not going to go. And we are going to see kids that are reading on tablets, reading on their phones. But I don't really have any information. Okay.
Just the experience of your phone versus reading something, right? That sounds like a documentary that you should
there you
make.
go. The
It's
sequel,
great. Yeah.
the sequel.
You don't know basically. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. Yes, please.
You mean in particular, Ivy and Fred and Miss Causey's classroom? A sequel? I'm exhausted.
What do you think? Oh, yeah. Yes, please. You decide between the two of you. Go.
No, thanks so much for the question. I am white. I was born white. I still am white. And I think really for us, we didn't plan to make a film that was really primarily about Black and brown families. And meeting Kareem, I think, was just pivotal. And it was so clear that this had to be his story and his fight for his community. So what we really did is I really brought him in as a producer. And he, as you can see in this film, as well as the families, I think have a ton of agency. And it was a collaboration. It was really a big collaboration. There's so much right now that is happening in the conversation with documentary filmmaking around extraction and pulling stories from communities that you may not be a part of. But we had a lot of representation on our creative team. And I think it really was taking what we shot and bringing these scenes, not just to Kareem, who is actually a producer, but really to Isaiah, Teresa, Fred, and Melinda to make sure they felt that their story was being shared fairly and accurately in the way that they wish to share their story and get it out there. And I think with that collaborative representation and their involvement, it's such a much better film because of that. And I'm so grateful because for me, it was a very different way of approaching filmmaking. I've never involved our participants at that level. And I think really bringing Kareem on was a game changer because he was so involved in the process, as well as our editor, who is from Memphis and very connected to the community.
Say part two again.
What was part two? Sorry. I mean, I think it's bringing in evidence-based reading instruction, I think is impacting everybody. And I think that is the piece of it, right? Whole language balanced literacy is, like everything in our country, disproportionately impacting BIPOC communities, right? But implementing the solutions is also impacting them positively as well as everybody else. So, you know, Kareem's metaphor of being on this bus, I mean, if we are on that bus, I think we're cranking ourselves back on the edge of that cliff as we implement the correct cognitive and brain science ways to teach reading.
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
It's been really fun. He has a much better answer. And when he's asked the question, we've been doing some national media, which has been really fantastic. But he is my dad's neighbor. My dad is a retired television director, and they met on a Norman Lear pilot years ago after LeVar had shot Roots. And so my dad sees him in the neighborhood every once in a while. But when LeVar's asked, LeVar says, it's divine intervention. And I think, you know, I got brave and asked my dad, I said, Dad, you know, this was probably, we had our first assembly cut. It was about 2.5 years ago. And I said, please introduce me to LeVar. Like, there's no one who would be a better EP on this project, who is such an amazing civil rights activist and has played the Black experience, you know, from formerly enslaved people and the atrocious tragedies that they lived through to Star Trek: The Next Generation and the future, and his role in as the beloved PBS host of Reading Rainbow. And so he connected us, and I had to send a bunch of emails because, as you can imagine, he's LeVar Burton and his inbox is super crazy. And he watched an assembly cut and gave us notes, and then gave us notes a second time. And then I sent an email and he said yes. Yeah, really fun, really fun. And he is like the most remarkable person. You know, he is who you think he is. He is genuine. He's so on fire about this. We are leaving on Sunday. We go to DC and we have 3 events on Sunday and Monday in DC. We are doing a screening with Secretary Cordona, and then we are screening at the largest conference for state superintendents and leaders across the country. And he is like just fired up about this. I mean, he is so fired up about the film and the change and saving our next generation, as well as book banning. That's his, I mean, he's just
Those
like,
are 2 things.
those are his, he is, yeah.
I wanted to ask about, this is a question I often ask documentary filmmakers. Are you an activist or an artist?
Yeah.
I'm not saying she can't.
Yeah.
I'm asking the question.
I think that's the trick
She can
question.
be both.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can be both.
They are not mutually exclusive, Doug, right?
No,
But for
no,
me, I am
they're
first an activist. I am first an activist. And yeah, I was raised by a wild mom who was a civil rights activist, women's rights, anti-Vietnam War marches. I mean, that was my childhood. And so it's just, I think social and racial justice are like so near and dear to my heart. And if we aren't fighting for those things, then, you know, really what is our purpose on this planet is sort of how I feel. There's nothing that matters more. And I think for me, the art and the storytelling has kind of come working with my team who's smarter and younger than me.
So a documentary for you is not just a passive observation of something that's happening. You want it to be active. You want change.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
good answer. Jenny, thank you very much. Thank you very much for, wait.
thank you.
Let's,
One more.
yes, please.
Woo! So we got really lucky. We got an incredible social impact grant. And basically the impact grant, we worked on it for about 3 months and then launched it right after our premiere at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. And for National Reading Awareness Month, which is the month of March, but we allowed the film to be viewed online for free for a week. We had 39,000 people who viewed the film. It's really quite remarkable. It's sort of unprecedented. And with this grant, we are going to take the film into all 50 states. We have a really amazing leader who is running the impact campaign. And the whole idea, a film is only as good as the audience it reaches. So what we have to do is we bring the film into communities. You create panel discussions with stakeholders in your own communities. You bring teachers, you bring parents, you bring school board members, you bring superintendents, and you use the film as a tool. This film is a tool to ignite change across the country. And I think it's really started a movement. I mean, I feel very excited in the way in which I'm seeing the film be used to really create broad change. And we're seeing policy change, but as I mentioned earlier, policy is only good if it's implemented. This requires culture change, right? Teachers feel shame and blame because they weren't taught correctly. So we have to really create culture change on the ground with teachers because they are our heroes and they're doing such good work, right? Oh, you go right ahead.
Good.
Woo!
Thank you all. Thanks very much for being with us.